Monetary policy and fiscal policy. What is the difference? Right here, right now. All right, guys, monetary policy and fiscal policy are two of the most widely used tools by a government or government entities in order to influence a nation's economic activity. Monetary policy is primarily concerned with the flow of money and the movement of interest rates. Fiscal policy is primarily concerned with stimulus spending and deficit spending. So let's take a look at them in a little more detail. Monetary policy is controlled by a central bank. It is not controlled by the government. And there's a very clear reason for that, because we want to control inflation. We want to have a separation of powers so that there's no conflict, a sort of checks and balance system, because setting the tone for how much money to print and how high interest rates should not be left to the government, because they're in a conflict, right? So the central bank is a completely independent third party that takes a look at the macroeconomic picture and decides the monetary supply, how many dollars in the system, whether to print more money. And they also decide whether or not to increase or decrease the overnight lending rate or the prime rate. Anytime they make a decision on the overnight rate, moving interest rates up or down, that directly impacts you and I, because the banks then change their interest rates. We end up paying more on our credit cards, on our line of credits, on our car payments, because interest rates are higher, and that reduces the amount of money that we have. And in fact, it slows the economy down. Conversely, if they reduce interest rates, it increases the likelihood that we're going to be spending and reduces the likelihood that we'll be saving, because we're not getting much on our savings. So they really have the ability, with the movement of interest rates, the central bank, to decide how much activity there's going to be in the economy. The more they increase interest rates, the more they want to reduce the spending and cool down inflation. Remember, inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. So if you increase the cost of borrowing, you're likely to have less individuals borrow money to buy goods, and therefore less economic activity, therefore a reduction in inflation. So increasing interest rates is one way that the central bank will try to attack an inflationary problem by reducing the economic activity. The other one is through monetary policy, setting their money flow. How many dollars are going to be in play? How many dollars are they going to print? The more money you print, the more likelihood that we will be buying stuff, and the more prices are likely to increase. The more you increase the supply of money, the bigger your inflation problem becomes. Everyone remembers the story of Argentina. They've had a real hard time with significant inflation in South America, where something that cost $1 last year cost $2 this year. Zimbabwe had some serious issues in the early 2000s. Germany in the 1920s. Inflation has been around for a very long time, and it's a serious problem. And it always happens when governments get greedy. They choose to print money to try to solve their problem of debt, right? So if you just print more money, you give money to everyone, hey, we took care of the problem, short term. But what happens long term? Too many dollars chasing too few goods, you get inflation. So the monetary supply is one critical component to making sure to keep your inflation in check. By reducing the monetary supply, we're likely to spend less, which means inflation will be lower, which means we have less economic activity. Monetary supply, either printing more money or moving interest rates, is a key way that the central banks can control and impact the economic situation of a specific country. The other way they do it is through fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is controlled by the government themselves. So they can control taxation, they can control stimulus, and they can control their deficit spending. All of those will directly impact the consumer, and as a whole, will have an impact on the GDP growth of a nation. If a government believes that there's not enough business activity, they will likely reduce taxes. If you reduce taxes, you create more dollars in my pocket. You create the corporations are more profitable. They might hire more people. I'm going to spend more. Therefore, you're spurring economic activity. If you reduce it too much, you might get inflation. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. The other thing that the government can do is stimulus spending. So this would be social programs or benefits directly to the Canadian consumer. And I get money, and the programs will create some jobs. Those individuals will spend money, and that's going to stimulate the economy as a whole. So finally, the third way to do it is through deficit spending. Deficit spending would be the government buying up some of their debt or creating some more debt, and they're hoping that that money eventually will funnel into the system and move elsewhere and stimulate growth that way. Fiscal policy, you're moving taxes to either increase or decrease the monetary supply and the impact on the consumer. You're creating social programs by spending or cutting the spending of the government, or you're creating deficit programs where you're either creating deficit or reducing your deficit to buy debt. All of those three are fiscal policy measures that are commonly used by governments in order to either stimulate or slow down the economy. Remember, if the government is worried about high inflation, they're going to want to decrease their spending, they're going to want to increase taxes, and they're going to make sure that there's no debt spending. If a government wants to stimulate the economy, they're going to do the opposite. They're going to reduce taxes, they're going to increase their government spending through surplus, and they're going to increase their spending through deficit spending. Okay, there you have it. Monetary policy, either printing more money or moving interest rates. Fiscal policy, controlling of taxes, surplus spending, and deficit spending. That's the ways that the government can impact their economy and try to move the lever towards more activity or less activity. And it's incredibly difficult to get perfect. And they always have a target. They try to keep inflation at 2%, try to keep interest rate at 2%. And if you get out of whack, you really need to do some aggressive moves, which is what we're seeing in late 2022. And also remember that the central bank is in charge of the monetary policy and the government is in charge of the fiscal policy. If you'd like to know more about this, guys, or you want to book a no obligation call, go to www.speaktorob.com. Love to book a chat with you to discuss this or anything else that's on your mind with respect to your investments or your portfolio. Take a sec to like and subscribe, guys. I'm Rob Tetrault from robtetrault.com. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next video.